So you're starting this new, just give me like the sort of the one-liner on this new, what do you call it, an industry group? What's the correct term
We're
to
calling it an
describe
alliance,
it?
and the rationale behind it is that AI agents are incredibly important. And also I think like a key thing that has changed is that they've gone from being like a concept, a hope, to like something that's like very technically viable. And so then the question is like, what does that future look like? So this is the alliance of people building AI agents who care about what the world's going to look like after we've built the thing that we've built. And so the idea is that we can get together and have an open line with policymakers so that rather than trying to respond to developments after the fact, we're actually just working alongside. So, like, if you think of like just an incomplete list of things that you've got to think about when AI agents are kicking around, and at scale, it's going to be things like privacy, authentication, trustworthiness, risk.
I want to just ask you, why are we, if you're talking about, okay, the future of what the world's going to look like after AI, why zero in on agents? Why not just have an AI sort of openness, group that's sort of like, wants policymakers to make sure that we don't have walled gardens in general? Like, why make it about agents specifically?
I think it's the breadth of it, right? AI and just digital technology are seen to be very hard to disentangle, and AI agents are like a very specific application. That's also going to be a huge application. So it's really about like sort of just the tractability of those problems. I mean, I think like I don't disagree with you that it would be also awesome if we could have something.
Well, I mean, let me ask you this way. Like, I mean, you could almost brand it as like the AI walled gardens group or something, right? I mean, isn't that ultimately the concern? And I want to get more into the concerns, but like, isn't that really what you're worried about here? Is that you're going to have these walled gardens that we've seen sort of spring up in Web 2.0, and they're going to happen with AI, and it's going to make startups. It's going to be really hard for new startups to compete, that sort of thing.
So it's one of a whole set of things that we're thinking about. So walled gardens are an incredibly important thing for everything that you've described, right? Yeah. But there's also just questions about like what do like responsible agents look like? What do trustworthy agents look like? There are other questions. There's also sort of the other side of the obligation as well. Like we want to take down the walls of the walled garden. We need to make sure that the things that we build are actually are holding up their end of the bargain too. So we're sort of coming to it wanting to engage the full complexity of it. And if you look at the membership of the AFI, it's actually, it's a really interesting distribution, right? Like you have like defense tech startups that care deeply about the way that they're going to be able to work with these complex existing systems. You have, you've got, Intuit, you've got us, and you've got Anthropic. Like each approaches the world in a different way and has a different concept of what agents are, but we share that set of concerns. And like,
It's the Agentic Futures Initiative, right? In case
that's
we didn't,
right, yeah.
Did we say that already? Yeah.
I don't know if we did, yeah. The Agentic Futures Initiative, or I'll probably be calling it the AFI because that's the shorthand we use now.
So basically, if I could sum it up for you, the argument is like, really where the rubber meets the road is agents, right? I mean, we have chatbots, we have image generation, all this stuff, but like if you really want sort of the power of AI comes when you have all your stuff kind of working together and doing things for you autonomously. And if I think about it, I mean, this is more like the walled gardens problem. If I think about it, it's like, it's not really that useful unless I can go across all of my stuff, right? I use so many different platforms for work, for personal, even within work and personal, there's just all these different things.
Yeah.
So, I definitely see where, I mean, even today, if you look at like what Microsoft is launching, Google's launching, like it's not like they're, and there may be technical hurdles here too, but like it's not like they're reaching across outside of platforms very much, like at least in the sort of more off the shelf products.
That's right. I mean, it doesn't seem at all to be the goal of what they're launching, and I mean, just business sense. I mean, it makes sense for them to be doing that, but there's a larger societal question of what's good for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the safety responsibility part. I mean, that was sort of I've covered it like these antitrust issues for a long time, and I remember like that was always Apple's defense, right? When they would sort of be criticized for or taken to court for, sort of keeping the App Store locked down and like not allowing competitors in there, or sort of like charging for rent essentially. It's like, well, we need to make this secure and it costs money, and it's always about that. So was your thinking there like, let's preempt that argument by sort of, you could almost create that sort of system of security that would exist as like maybe an industry standard or something that sort of like precludes the eventual argument that, well, we're the only ones who can handle the security here.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, like all these arguments are like, correctish to a degree, right? The question is like, why is that the only way that we're going to do it? Why don't we actually come up with something that's actually like broadly beneficial, as opposed to sort of given a specific setup? Yeah, yes, you're providing security, but that's not the only way of going at it. And there's also like, and it's also worth remembering that like all the predatory constructs that exist in tech exist like within the frameworks that the platforms have built. So they also haven't actually solved for a whole slew of other things. They're just not bringing them up in the antitrust trials.
Yeah. There's another phenomenon that I've noticed, and I don't have a word for this phenomenon, but like there's just these sort of a lot of these moves lately in AI to kind of get, I don't know, like interoperability, like, OpenAI is doing their apps thing, but it's like they're asking companies to sort of build the apps, build the integrations for them to make it work with their products, right? The similar thing happened with their browser. You're here saying like, look, we need this industry association to make sure that all these things can work together. I think it's like when you see these things, I think, well, it sort of assumes that the technology is not going to a place that I think a lot of people were arguing maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, that like this is going to be so powerful that there would be no need for this, right? Like there'd be no way for companies to even have walled gardens, because these AI agents would be so smart they could just get around them, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the technical argument always felt like a distraction, frankly, because like maybe they'll be so powerful that we can. But here's the thing: you just write in your terms of service, you're not allowed to use X, and then it doesn't matter how strong or how powerful your tech is. And this is the framing that I often come back to, which is that every time we interact with a platform, the sophistication of what we're interacting with is astonishing, and then the sophistication of what we have on our side is basically just like an app wrapper around that sophistication. So it's like going to like a battle with a baguette. Like so you try to buy, like you like when I like to think of myself as a savvy traveler when it comes to buying tickets. The amount of time I spend just like working through combinations. Meanwhile, there are pricing algorithms that are have tried to figure out all the nuances of what I might do in my 1,000 search. And so that imbalance is bonkers, but I think it's worth emphasizing that it is being held up legally more so than technically, right? Like this is the idea, you can't use your own systems, you can't. And that's where I think
actually, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, is it though? Because I mean, you're allowed to, the Supreme Court, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, has like upheld our right to scrape the web, essentially, right? Yeah. And I think if you sort of take that, the underlying law behind that, opinion, I think if the technology were powerful enough to really just get around walled gardens and there's nothing they could do to stop you, like I don't think they'd be able to just, maybe it would have to go to the Supreme Court again, but I think ultimately, like, they're not going to be able to stop that as long as you're using it for your own personal use. It's not like a copyright violation or something else, right?
So yeah, I mean, I think where I would draw a distinction between what I think is like true and correct in interpreting the law, and then like, am I going to be able to raise my seed round building the thing, because like that's not a great slide in your deck. We think the Supreme Court would probably back us, but you're going to need to
Yeah.
back the
Yeah.
lawsuit. And so we're in this really interesting. But what this starts to do is you get these two categories, because like big boys are just going to go for it, right? And then they can tussle in court. And then, but the startup ecosystem, which is where the most interesting stuff will come, I don't think it can get off the ground under those circumstances.
But it's a side point anyway, because I think, I mean, I would argue, I think we probably both agree here that the technology is not anytime soon going to be that powerful. And what this is going to take to get all of these agents to work, which most of them don't today, let's just be honest, is a lot of stuff going on in the background. There's going to have to be a lot of there's going to probably be like a whole industry built around just making these things work across platforms, and lots of opportunities there. Now, if, like you said, if you can't raise your seed round to start one of these companies that is like a middleman or whatever, that's probably not a nice term for it, but doing a service in this,
we'll rebrand it. Yeah,
but rebrand it. But like they can't raise their seed round, then I mean, you just end up with by default. Yeah, you're back to these walled gardens, and now if I want to have like powerful agents, I have to have everything on the Microsoft platform or everything on the Google platform.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, right? Like, and even if you think about like, what does it take to let's take kind of the easier case of like, I'm going to interact with a service in the browser. So there's computer use. It needs to work reliably. I'm trying to, I'm still embarrassed about this, but I had like, a set of medical appointments in which I went to the wrong office location late. Which I feel like software could have helped me on this. And but then the business of just getting into like my medical records, knowing this is the relevant one, pulling it out, knowing I'm a moron, so you need to bank time for me to like get in my Uber and all of that. That's the sort of a thing where like, as like a problem articulation, it's like such an easy problem. Right, but from a like, do we have the pieces? And we're kind of like an inch away from all of the pieces, but they haven't clicked yet, right? Yeah. And so I think you're absolutely spot on. Like I think we're also going to see specialization. Like there's one thing to scrape where you don't actually care about the fidelity of what you scraped. It's another where it's mission critical to know exactly what you have pulled. And so there's a lot of work there. I mean, again, like all of this is racing along in terms of technical sophistication and what it can do. So I'm not saying this is saying I'm skeptical that we'll get there, but we still have to get there. And that's what makes this moment interesting. Yeah. Yeah,
it really is. It really is. I mean, these are fascinating questions. I think one of the other things which would be interesting to address is that, right now, if you want to use this stuff, it's really, at least for consumers, it's really the cloud. If you want to use the most powerful AI, right? It's all in the cloud. I mean, I can go get the OpenAI API and there are, I think, few restrictions. There are some, but I can kind of do what I want today. But obviously, like if I become dependent on that, down the road, those restrictions could change, right?
And they always do, right? Like I mean, I think this is the point of the area. Like the design of the setup is that they can change that, and there are many good reasons for that. Like if you had a physical store, you should be able to change the layout. But that sort of a dependency. This cloud point is really important. Like I look, cloud is the dominant paradigm of our moment because it just basically gives us access to like so many benefits of centralization, but that also comes at the cost of control. And so this is also one of the things that drives, on the imbue side of things, like why we're so focused on you being able to create your own software, is the idea that we want to lessen that dependency. We want you to control your agents. But we also have this really interesting question of like, how open are these agents going to be? Because you could imagine an interoperable ecosystem in which they're all closed, they're all loyal to someone else. And so we have like another set of issues. I don't think they're yet today issues, but they are coming where we're going to need to rethink these paradigms. And if we're fully dependent on these walled gardens, then we never even get to those questions.
Yeah. So I think we've kind of outlined the problem. The reason for this organization to exist. Now, do you have a sense of the asks for, I don't know, is it policymakers but it's also industry, right? It's also, you want to create industry standards, is my understanding.
We're like, and I think it's like really important. Like the first step here was like, could we find like-minded companies that wanted to approach the relationship with policymakers in a different way. Like, that's the driving ethos here. Because, the other thing you do is, like, go set up a pack and just, like, bang on your issue or, and instead, so we don't have, like, a set of things where, like, we didn't form saying, like, we are going to go push for XY legislation. Rather, we formed and said, we all share a concept around that agents ought to be like broadly beneficial. It's interesting because it's like for individuals, for businesses. Like if you think the small business angle, like we talk about walled gardens, like we're often talking about like you and me being pissed about like trying to get out of like one platform and onto another, right? But if you think of that in like the startup small business context, like that's like, a hundredfold, just, nobody, like, people don't get jazzed about like accounting issues, right? But like these are the realities that they're contending with. So it was sort of that shared vision combined with a belief that the way to go at it is going to be through policymaker education and sort of coordinating. So rather than trying to slam something down people's throats, the idea is to say, like, could we actually just like co-develop our responses to things? And I think all the companies at the table, that's been their approach.
Do you think any of the stuff that's happening now in Europe and to a lesser extent the U.S. Or maybe at the state level on antitrust or anti-competitiveness would apply to this world, or do you think it needs to be specific to AI, to the AI era?
Okay, so let me. I'm not speaking on behalf of AFI. I'm speaking as Matt and the Imbue perspective. I mean, I think that they're like deeply interlinked, right? In terms of we're talking about platform power. We're talking about it's a not quite monopolistic in the in a precise definition of it, but we're looking at sort of anti-competitive effects. I think part of just putting on my lawyer hat, I think that I don't think our antitrust rules like work for our moment. Like I think the world's really changed in that regard, but the reality is that like walled gardens perpetuate themselves through anti-competitive behavior. So whatever chips away at that is incredibly beneficial. I think that you have a really interesting jurisdictional dynamic though that's going on where you've got state level in the US attempts to be relatively targeted about how to solve things. If for a moment we grant good faith to the federal level, one of my observations is that there are actually, like when I look at the attempts to solve some of the larger like problems around like data protection and privacy and things like that, these are often just very sophisticated responses. The problem is they're also up against a problem that we've spent decades building up, like a tech industry predicated on these laws not existing. And then Europe's just a different game and a different approach. And I think what I would caution with that is that I think there's a lot of what Europe does that I'm supportive of. There's a lot of stuff I want to nitpick on. But the larger point is that we're not in Europe. And so, there's only so much that we can transfer in that experience. And I think that it's like, policy people like to, they like to get into it and have panels about this stuff. But the reality is that, at least as far as, our context goes, this is very much state and federal, and we need to focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed, so you mentioned Anthropic as part of this. OpenAI is not. Have they been asked to join? What's the story there?
We didn't have that connection. And so it was really around the companies already, thinking and talking and acting in a particular way. So I think again, I don't represent the AFI, like we're members, but like we're quite selective about how we've chosen who can join, and you really do have to have the shared vision and ethos. We're going to continue to grow, the membership. But it's also going to be, I think we're going to have to be really thoughtful about what like the admission criteria is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I could see both arguments like for why they would sort of want to join or not join. But I mean, they have this. I think if they want to do this super app, right, that lives on the App Store, they want to build. I don't know. They're trying to build this hardware device, and sometimes I wonder if like part of that is they realize at some point, you have to break out of this mobile ecosystem if you want to really if you want to really expand the power of the platform. So,
well, so here's the thing, right? Like if we cycle back to when like the social media and search platforms were monetizing, and it was clear it was going to be ad revenue. What's really interesting is if we had developed good privacy rules then, there would still be these like massive companies without any of the predatory or without the same predatory behaviors. Like we could have leveled the playing field. We could have made it differently. And so one of the things here is that when I'm looking at the players in the ecosystem, I mean, not everyone has to be a member of the AFI, but we can actually create rules that level the playing field. We all play by those rules, but those rules actually protect individuals and protect small businesses. That's a huge win. So that's what I see in this moment, is that's the opportunity if we can get that right. And look, I totally get the temptation to not want that, because if you think you're going to have an edge, an advantage absent that, you can see why the incumbents would never do this. But that's also a like we don't need to accede to that. Like we don't need to grant that. Like this is our chance to actually to reinvent what tech will look like, and that's what the previous generations did, and that's our turn now. So it is interesting when we're looking at I think we can, especially with some of the big boys, like to look at what they're building and to ask like, where's this all going? Like, we're all asking those questions and paying attention. But I think that the opportunity here is to just, be excited about everything everyone's building, but ask like, is this going to get us to the future that we want? And if the answer is not yes, then we should then we should ask what rules can guide that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I wonder what it would have looked like. I mean, you said we still could have had these big platforms, but without the predatory stuff, right? Had we changed? Have we sort of like figured out the policy ahead of time? I mean, you can sort of make an argument that actually, some of these companies might have been better off with a bit more competition, right? Like I look at Apple and I think, they obviously had a great run, but I don't know. I mean, there's not much happening new over there, right? They've kind of missed the AI thing, and I think that's partly what happens when you're just kind of,
I think that's right. I mean, it's not to out you on this, but we're old enough to remember when
what are you talking about?
When Mac OS was exciting, right?
Right.
I mean, this wild thing that you would have like a Unix underpinning, but like this gorgeous interface. Like just this was a moment. Like I know everyone talks about the iPhone, but as a CS major, the fact that like I wasn't stuck in an ugly ass terminal was like one of the most glorious things ever. And I like pulled my money and bought a Mac. And I remember like my parents like, why would you need to do this? But it was like it was genuinely thrilling. And I think that's right. I think that and the competition is. It's also about imagination, right? It's about like, what are you going to build? What are you going to how are you going to reconceive the world? And that's thrilling, but also something that has to be managed or done with, something that I often ask sort of in private circles is like, is there virtue here? Like, are we building the things we ought to be building? Like one of the things that was most interesting to me when Vibes came out is like, just because you could, like, why? like this is, or why in this way, right? And it was sort of bonkers to me to look at like these video generation technologies, which are just thrilling, right? In terms of just the pure capability, and you're like, and the point is what? And I think that's a really important thing that I think as an industry, tech. I find like anthropologically fascinating, because over the course of my career, it's gone from this place where people aspired to something rich and deep to sounding like management consultants saying, well, I guess there's nothing we can do but push in the same direction. And it's a, and my response to that is like, come on, especially in a moment like now where we have that much agency over where we're going. But I think the thing that I keep going back to is our agency is not just about what we bang into our IDEs. The agency is actually over the industry that we craft, and this is where something like the AFI is really exciting to me because like when you have that open line with policymakers, when I'm in a snarky mood, the thing I like to point out to the Silicon Valley set is like you have you're always talking about how government's so backwards. You have no idea how sophisticated people are when it's their job to take care of the citizenry and the fact that they have this depth across so many domains. But they can bring back to us things that we will not see ourselves, and we can bring to them the things that we have the expertise on. And so that's where my excitement lies, right? Like it's like let's actually get this wave done right.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so we talk about government, but there's also kind of an industry standard kind of thing that I think could happen. I mean, the web, the original web was open, and people who really designed it and built it with these open standards, they didn't do it, they weren't doing it for money, right? It wasn't developed inside big companies. So is there some way to kind of follow that path? Have you thought about that? Is there a...
We have, I think, one nice thing is that we get to inherit what the web, web's architects gave us. I don't want to diminish that I think there's more work to be done on this front. I think standards are going to be like a really critical part of how we sort things out, particularly around building trust and managing modes of interaction. And I think we're starting to see if you look at something like MCP, it's just so early on. I mean, the thing that's striking to me about it was how kind of just in not a bad way, how basic it is. Right. And now we need to push past that, and we're going to need to actually figure out what that looks like. So I mean, I think a resounding yes. The question is, what's the arena or the forum for that? I don't know. I think that something like the AFI, I think, just as being an industry alliance is a spot where conversation like that can happen. I think thinking about standards, they often call for a very, very large tent. So I also so it will be interesting to see how that plays out. And the other thing that about standards is standards have to get developed by competitors. Right, your internet, and this is what's fascinating to me about the current web standards, and they're all basically fierce competitors send their technical guy, and they work out how it should work, because there's a recognition that you need that at least that part to be cooperative and functional.
And I think on both the standards and sort of industry side and the government side, you have examples now of, from the web era of really great policy that actually became outdated. So Section 230 is great. And then great technology that sort of happened, right? The web, all the web protocols, amazing, right? But then we're still locked into those in a way, and they're not very secure, right? They couldn't have anticipated what cybersecurity would look like today, right? And then Section 230 couldn't have anticipated the sort of neural network based, attention algorithms that just plagued social media. I mean, so none of this stuff is it's I don't know, is there some way to make it not set in stone, or allow it to evolve, or is that just part of the cost of doing business with this stuff?
So I have this a little cheeky of a concept that I call legal debt, which is that we build technical systems, you always accrue technical debt, and it's important. You just can't avoid that. It's a nonsensical thing. You don't know where it's going. You're gonna have to make compromises, all of that. And I just the law follows the same course, right? And we have the common law for a reason. You've got statutory law, but you also need courts to be sitting there, because there's going to be the first time somebody hits somebody with a rubber chicken, right? And you're going to have to figure out what category that falls into, and the rubber chickens will evolve and things are going to change. And so I think what maybe I want to resist is the idea that we're going to write the perfect Section 230A that's going to somehow hold even as like the world completely transforms itself over and over again. And instead, we need to shift to a mindset that says like, what is it that we're protecting? Like, what are the fundamental rights and liberties of individuals in a society that have to hold even as the context shifts? Because I have this, we've talked about that. I've got this larger argument that really what's happened is that we have this whole set of digital spaces that just aren't like physical spaces. If we think about this conversation right now, it's being recorded. That's nuts. If 50 years ago, the notion that that you would have a recording after this conversation is bonkers. But now that exists, but that also opens up a whole slew of things. And so I think the response to it, I'm really insisting that the response has to be agility. And that's, again, why I think that, this a purely anti-regulatory posture. I know not too many people hold, the extreme of it, but there's kind of this slightly less extreme version where you pretend that you would like a good regulation, but they just never exist. And that one is, and that has, a lot of adherence. And I think it's an exceedingly dangerous one because what it does is it just pretends that your technical debt's not going to bite you in the ass. And that's basically where I think we are now. And I think we've accrued a lot of legal debt.
Your legal debt.
Yeah, legal debt.
So 230 would be legal debt. A great example of
laws,
that.
Right.
Right. A lot of the DMCA, probably there's some legal debt there. And yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is trying to somehow make government work, make the federal government work, or, that's... Yeah.
So
that's a tall order.
It's a tall order, but I think we've I want to acknowledge our moment, but I also at the same time I think I want to push back on the notion that government doesn't work. Because it does. It fails us in many regards and can be exceedingly frustrating in many others. Having moved a startup to California and dealing with the franchise tax board, my love of government has its qualifications, right? But it does work, and
we're in this point though where it's just very hard to update laws. Oftentimes, when you see these laws where both parties seem to agree, and then they still can't figure out how to update these things. Seems like a structural problem. I don't want to blanket say government doesn't work. I mean, I guess it's more politicians don't work. I mean, government is probably the wrong term.
I also think that there are, and again, I don't want to sound Pollyannish, although I think I am sounding Pollyannish. That there are moments. I actually think we're in a moment where asking for movement and agility that's preposterous. But those moments give way. One of the things that our team in DC often reminds me of is just how much actually gets done at times when people aren't paying attention, and the difference between what's in the headlines and when you get bipartisan cooperation. I found it really interesting that the closest bill that we or the closest attempt that we have at interoperability would be Senator Mark Warner's Access Act, and he introduced that bill with Josh Hawley. And it's not just the two of them. It's actually we're talking a real consensus around that something has to be done on this stuff, bipartisan in kind of not bipartisan. We found the two guys who like each other despite their politics, but real members of their partisan tribes who are saying this crosses the boundaries. And so whether or not,
where is it now? Where is that now?
It's in the Senate. It's been entered. The question as to whether a bill like that passes immediately or takes time to get there. I think this is also one of the challenges with federal, and this is also where since you've asked, I'll take a shot at sort of the folks who are saying that state is problematic. Is that what happens is that state lawmaking often sets a floor, sets a standard, and then and federal has to follow. And if that pressure isn't there, the nature of federal lawmaking means that it's just often just doesn't move. And I think data protection and privacy laws are a perfect example of that. Had California not done something, that pressure just wouldn't exist in the same way at the federal level, at least I'd argue. And yet now we're seeing on both sides of the line also attempts at that. And so
how many years ago did that pass? The California bill? Six years ago or something.
Yeah, but this is the pace of it, and
yeah.
The flip side is that this wonderful article by Kevin Fraser in Lawfare. I mean, it's kind of wonderful because I disagree with it but love it, which is and he's like, we can't, like, we need to make sure that we don't embarrass ourselves in the future by the laws that we try to pass now. I mean, and I think as guidance, I love that, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you don't do anything. And not that he's arguing that either, but I think it is like if we put on a disposition of cautiousness and responsibility about this. Like, we're not regulation for regulation's sake, but asking, like, what does the next moment need? That was what Section 230A is. For all the critiques of it, the internet would not have evolved without it.
Yeah, Section 230, I agree. Like, it's sort of a double-edged sword. I mean, it was sort of genius in a way, right? I mean, obviously it came after like a bunch of lawsuits, and it was sort of like, I don't know if we're like there yet on the AI front. We're still like in the sort of like arguing about copyright phase, but that, like, there were just things were going through the courts, and I think some smart, level-headed people are like, hey, we need to figure this out. I think the problem you run into with tech now is that it's like, I mean, sure, like, you could say, like, laws are passed every day, in Congress, right? Like, there's constant lawmaking going on. You can't say they don't do anything. But when it affects like really deep-pocketed companies, that just becomes very difficult, because like, any misstep, and that could mean like their stock price, they lose like $100 billion in market cap overnight because of some, so I think it just gets like it just grinds to a halt.
And let's also be honest about like the bad faith things that get done, like the ease with which a bill can get killed. I mean, it's sort of like nuts. Also, just like there's a whole machinery to pop up like these dubious think tanks and things just to muddy the water, and it's like, and there's just this dirty game that sucks. And I don't want to pretend that's not there, but it's also, we don't have another mechanism to make rules. So we've got to figure out.
Let's
how
think
to
about
use
this.
that.
Actually, this is interesting. So, like, Section 230. Probably, tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a scholar. You're smart on this, but like, I'm guessing that there wasn't like a very big, deep-pocketed industry group that was like fighting against that. Was there?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. And I look, I want to call it that. Like, I'm not a deep expert on this, but my understanding of it was that you were really early on. You had this relatively broad-based excitement, enthusiasm about the internet. So the question is like, are we gonna let's keep this thing going? I think was the vibe. So when they brought it, like, I don't recall what the vote breakdown was, but I don't think we were looking at real opposition. There wasn't someone who's gonna lose on it, right? Like, it was I mean, maybe the group that
some
might,
plaintiffs, lawyers, or
plaintiffs,
something. But I think that, like, that's sort of, I guess, like, you're kind of in that moment now, even though there are these big incumbents that are obviously like playing in this, but it's so undefined that I don't know if you'd have. There's maybe a seam that you could find where, like, there's some interesting legislation that is not necessarily threatening to any big group, but would sort of think ahead or something, or.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, that's the approach to, frankly, when we're advocating, and when I say we, like me and Imbu, around interoperability, I mean, this is one of the things that we're saying, is that, like, what you can do is impose bilateral obligations. So you're basically saying, like, these are platform obligations, and those might make you, like, there's some friction there. But on the flip side, there are agent obligations. So, like, it won't act, unless it's authorized to act on your behalf, and it will let you know what it's doing and things like that. So we can address, like, when you started about, like, these security and other concerns that could be raised, like, we can actually preempt a lot of those in a way that also start to shift the concerns and burdens from the platform. So there's also something around how we make the space a bit more neutral, right? Like, where what we're saying is that we're all, agents have obligations, platforms have obligations, either sensible and minimal. And then what we get to do then is, let's just build what's next on that basis. Like, that's something where you get to keep your market cap intact.
I also think one thing I should have asked you about earlier is, like, is there, we sort of laid out the problem, but, like, is it too early for real world examples? Like, is there stuff happening right now that illustrates the problem?
I mean, I think I think they're like plenty, right? Like in terms of just the challenge that we have, and I promise to give you the examples, but the construction does matter, which is that we are arguing about a loss because something doesn't exist, right? It's not that not that like I tried to throw up my
Well, but
agent.
I mentioned is the Microsoft and Google examples, and how like the consumer facing stuff is very like still inside their ecosystems. But is there like anything where like Imbue is trying to build a product, but they're bumping up against
Yeah.
like, okay, this we can't do this because we're not allowed to tap
Yeah.
into something.
Imbue's not going to, because we're building we build tools that let you build the agents, right?
So
Like
your customers would
so
run
our
into this
customers
issue.
are the ones who are going to hit up against this, because it's like it's just a classic. I want to go into LinkedIn and find the three people I spoke to at the conference and the whatever. Like I'm not I'm not permitted to do that. Like I just can't. Like the terms of service say no. My medical example is like the more complex version of that is if you've got like real coordination things to do. The most medical record systems to the extent that they support interoperability are going to gatekeep who's in, who's out. If something's a threat to them, then they're not going to let it in. If price shopping, all of these things, we're looking at like Amazon won't let the chatbots into the stores, and this is also where your point about like, does the technology race so far ahead that Amazon can't tell the difference, right? Like that's the thing that it does get interesting if you get there, but what is going to happen though, right, is you're going to want your agent to not just pretend to be you. You want it to do stuff that an agent can do. Like, when I had to buy a thermos for my kiddo, and then I'm going to review them. I looked at 4. I wouldn't mind having someone look at 10, right? So there is a really interesting thing about what is the point of having these capabilities if we're just trying to like limit them to what you or I could do, and the whole point is to be able to have AI on our side.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like I have used some of these agentic browsers and done stuff on Amazon, but it's very, you have to be like on the page and sort of logged in already. Like it's not sort of like an API access kind of thing. It's more it's computer use, which is I'm sure there's stuff Amazon could do to stop that too if they want to. Or maybe they already have.
It will get harder. I mean, there will be a cat and mouse game. I think computer use actually is a really non-trivial space to watch, like on the interoperability arena, because the point comes where like, how can I really tell the difference? Because like if to function, the computer use tool has to learn how humans work. I mean, that's sort of what large language models and these large models do anyways, that they're mimicry. So they're very good at that. So if they need to quiver as they're moving the pointer to click on the add to cart, then they'll figure that out.
But they're susceptible to like prompt injection and stuff, and so then you could see companies using that to kind of throw them off.
Absolutely. And then there will also be really interesting, like we're not yet at the like anti-LLM phase of the lobbying conversation, but a point will come where if the LLM represents a threat to your walled garden, then you talk about their frailty and you could construct all of these arguments about why it needs to be within your garden and your LLM. And so we're gonna have like there's gonna be a fun time in a couple of years. But the thing is that I think we've got to, I think if it's oppositional, like there's always going to be friction, but the question is how oppositional does this need to be? And I think to your point, it's like, can we get to actually something that's good for the industry? And if we can get there, then that's like this huge win. And maybe that gets us 60% of the way, but then there are things that just incumbents won't like, and we need to do it for people, and then we just have to fight it.
Actually, no, I was talking to someone about the Uber thing, where when OpenAI announced all these app integrations, it was like, you can just like buy stuff within OpenAI. And I was like talking to someone at Uber about it, and they're like, well, you still have to go to Uber at the end of the process. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that. And it's like, we're very clear about that. Like, you can't just buy it through. You can't just like order a car through. And it's like, well, you could, but they don't want you to, right? Like that you're disintermediating this whole thing that they built that's really valuable. And no one's going to want that, right? No one's going to want to be I mean, except for customers,
I mean,
consumers.
yeah, and the other thing is, yeah, is also like new industries are going to rise up, like where what you do is you offer services where that interface layer is interchangeable, right?
Yeah,
And that's going to look totally different.
yeah,
I don't think we're there yet. I don't think
right.
that that's viable yet as as a set of businesses, but it will come fast, and I think,
Yeah,
and you're right, you're right. There will be so many reasons, but there's also, I mean, if you've built a giant ass business on the rules of the moment, and those rules are going to change, then that will be a threat to you. Like, I don't want to trivialize that. The question here that we have to ask is that, like, I think sometimes in like tech and AI policy, like we're scared of friction, but friction has to come. Like, we've got to make calls about this. Like, what are we willing to like? How much of the future are we willing to sacrifice to maintain the status quo? That's going to change anyway
yeah.
because the tech is coming. Yeah.
It's definitely the kind of regulation, if it is called regulation or whatever, but it's definitely the kind of thing that makes a lot of sense to me because it's like this is the stuff that will actually that will actually prevent, you know, just really cool, innovative stuff from being built,
Yeah.
right? And I think when you look at like the safety AI safety regulations, like in California, it's like okay, I mean, it's nice, like you have to show your
Yeah.
models to them or whatever, but like
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you really think if you really read like what the catastrophic risk people are writing, it's like that law is not stopping what they're worried about. So you know, I just think it does make sense to me that like yeah, what we should be focusing on is like no, this is actually there are a lot of hurdles to this stuff becoming, you know, just like free innovation happening in this space. I
Yeah.
don't think a
Yeah.
lot of people really realize that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's right, and I like that positioning. I mean, I think the like, we need good hygiene as an industry, but we also need to like we need innovation. Like that's the that to me is what's exciting. Not like you into the abstract. Any change is good change, but rather we've got something in our hands now that will change our relationship with machines. I don't think that if we took a snapshot of our moment that we have figured out a healthy relationship with our machines. And so if we've got another kick at that can, then why don't we do that in sort of the broadest based way? And I think
Yeah.
that even you and I can just sit here and imagine what would be nice, right? It's like we don't, it's actually like we don't have to go into some crazy like futuristic realm to do that, and that's because of that. That's why this feels so sort of so I don't know, urgent or I think let's just let's give it the attention it deserves because I think this is as much a design question as it is like a political or a confrontational thing. Like it's actually like let's design something good. Let's understand there are trade-offs, and then let's just build for that.
Well, thank you so much. I think I got what I need.
Honestly, the most important thing that I wanted to share is we're not pro-regulation, anti-regulation, or text fixated. The real thing here is like how do we protect people? And how do we make sure that all of this wild stuff that we're building actually accrues to their benefit? And that's the thing that, as long as we keep that in mind and ask that everyone keep in mind, I think that's what gets us to the future that we want. And it's hard work, but we can get there.